From the initial discovery of a wild food through its cultivation to today, I've got more foods for you, starting with the apricot. Cultivated for over 3,000 years in China, the apricot was eaten raw or smoked and sold as black smoked apricots. During these times, their seeds were also used to flavor dishes. This would make you think that they would come from China, but this isn't so sure. Their scientific name, Prunus armeniaca, suggests they come from Armenia, where it is thought that Alexander the Great brought apricots from Armenia to Greece. Writings from these times don't confirm this, though. Other research suggests the apricot came from Kabul, Afghanistan. It seems there may have been 5 different types during this time, with one of them falling apart if even touched with the most delicate pressure. The wild native to the common apricot, Armeniaca vulgaris, was yellow with an acidic taste that didn't taste very good. Despite the Armeniaca name, the species probably originated from China, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, or Kyrgyzstan, but who knows, it may have come from Afghanistan. Not sure we'll ever know. To produce an apricot, a hot summer, spring with no frost, and cool winter is needed to produce fruit. Genetically, the apricot is between a plum and a peach. For 1700 years, apricots were considered to be an early peach, but were eventually put in their own fruit group. 10 varieties of apricots were cultivated by seed in India, and as this fruit became more popular, it was cultivated from Japan and China all the way through northern Africa. Cultivation moved its way upwards to southern Europe, most notably Damascus, where much bigger farming practices took place. During this time, a fruit called mishmish, found among the oases of Egypt, was dried and consumed for some time. It wasn't until later on they were identified to be wild apricots that came from the seeds of a discarded apricot. So basically, someone brought them there, chucked the seeds on the ground at the oases, and 10 years later, people were calling them mishmish fruit. As cultivated progressed, different varieties were developed, like the Siberian apricot, which is able to take much colder temperatures. Cultivation brought on many new varieties and big demand for this fruit in Hungary, Rome, and Italy. They can be grafted onto a plum tree or peach tree rootstock and can be made into what is called a fruit salad tree, which has a different fruit on each branch, as I have here. This tree has nectarines, peaches, a couple varieties of plums, with the base of the tree being the apricot. Next up, we have lettuce, coming from the prickly lettuce or Lactuca cereriola. The wild lettuce was as the name suggests, a prickly leafed vegetable that was first cultivated in ancient Egypt for the oil from its seeds. The Egyptians selectively bred the tiny lettuce to improve their leaves starting in 2680 BCE. Considered to be the sacred plant of the reproduction god Min, the prickly leaf lettuce was placed near images of him during festivals. The prickly leafed lettuce has been immortalized in wall paintings, images in tombs, and used in religious ceremonies. Once cultivated, they measure 30 inches or 75 centimeters, which is about the size of a large romaine lettuce. After developed by the Egyptians, they were brought to the Greeks, who brought them to Rome. Around 50 CE, it was described by Roman agriculturist Columella that there were several varieties of lettuce at this point. During the reign of Domitian, the Romans ate their lettuce cooked with olive oil and vinegar dressing before the meal, which is where this tradition came from. Around 1100, lettuce started showing up in medieval writings, primarily as a medicinal herb. Joachim Camerarius described in 1586 3 of our modern lettuces today: loose-leaf lettuce, romaine lettuce, and head lettuce, which was first brought to the Americas by Christopher Columbus in the late 15th century. In Holland, between the 16th and 18th century, many varieties were developed, but lettuce was never transported far from where it was grown due to its perishability. It wasn't until the early 20th century, with the development of new shipping, packing, and storage techniques, that lettuce was starting to be shipped much further than before. Vacuum cooling, a revolutionary development, really changed the shipment of lettuce in the 1950s. Before vacuum cooling, a method called ice cooling was used in packing houses just outside lettuce fields. Lettuce has come a long way with the hundreds of varieties that have been created, which most are vastly different than the original prickly lettuce, a tough, bitter-tasting, spiny, unpleasant lettuce. A common fruit in China, Japan, Korea, for much of time, the Asian pear's popularity is spreading around the world. Cultivated for 3,000 years, much like the apricot, all Asian pears experienced hybridization and originated from 5 primitive gene pools. 4 of these gene pools come from Asian species Betulia, Passia, Pyrifolia, and Urienensis, with the 5th in question potentially being one of these, but since I'm already going to get roasted for my ability to pronounce scientific names, we'll skip the callouts to all of these varieties. The true origin is unclear, but they've been believed to have come from the western and southwestern mountainous areas of China. Most cultivated pears native to Asia come from Usuriensis, Cincinnatus, and Pyrus Pyrifolia. These wild Asian pears were only 1 centimeter or less than half an inch in diameter and grow on large trees that are covered with them. A whole bunch of selective crossbreeding has led to what we have today as 3 common Asian pears, or the Pyrus Pyrifolia: the Chinese white pear, Chinese sand pear, and Japanese pear. At this point, you may have noticed not all Asian pears look the same. The Chinese type are shaped more like European pears, where the Japanese ones are more like apples and are the predominant ones grown in the United States. Of the Japanese 2 main types, Akanashi Asian pears, which are the yellowish brown, where the Onashi type are more of a greenish yellow. The most common Japanese varieties grown today are all of these varieties you see here on the screen, which I'm not going to read out of respect for the Japanese language. The first Asian pear to land in the United States was a Chinese sand pear in New York in 1820. Asian pears continually came with Chinese and Japanese immigrants all the way through the 1850s. Oregon and California are the largest producers of Asian pears in the US, with a total of 5,000 acres dedicated to growing them. Today there are hundreds of varieties grown that usually take 4 years to bear fruit after planting and require a long cool period or chill requirement to start the growing process. They offer up a crisp apple-like bite with sometimes a sour-tasting core, which I'm quite fond of. The cashew, originating in northeastern Brazil between the Atlantic rainforest and the Amazon rainforest, this area is almost desert-like with its dry savanna woodland and thorn scrub terrain. This is important as cashews will grow in the rainforest but won't produce much fruit at all unless they have a distinct wet and dry season. The cashew, or scientifically Anacardium occidentale, appears to have come from the Anacardium excelsum, or the wild cashew. More commonly known as espave, this massive tree is as tall as a 7-story building. It offers up an edible seed and inedible fruit that is S-shaped, and despite it being inedible, it apparently tastes somewhat like strawberries. This wild cashew was domesticated before the arrival of the Europeans. The Portuguese brought the cashew to East Africa and the west coast of India in the 16th century, only a short time after its discovery in 1578. In India, it was planted initially to reduce erosion, as well as for the nut, with development of the cashew apple happening much later. These trees thrived in India and became well established. They were also brought up to Central America and the Caribbean islands. The nuts were already domesticated before Europeans arrived in Brazil. The native people of South America had figured out that roasting the nuts in fire would remove the caustic oil, which would allow them to be eaten without becoming ill. This technique wasn't known outside of this area for some time though, so only the apple was used. Once word got out, the Europeans capitalized on this knowledge, as well as the medicinal effects of the juice, bark, and the caustic seed oil. India, being the world's hub for cashew production, up until recently, developed more refined methods of removing the caustic shell oil, which gave birth to the cashew nut industry. The British butler developed a vacuum packing system which prolongs the shelf life of the cashew. Over the course of half a decade, cashews have been domesticated to produce high-yielding varieties, significantly more than the wild counterparts. Along with higher production, fenny, a popular juice made from the fruit, was also created. Over a few years, Vietnam has become the world's leader in producing cashew nuts, where Brazil, being 5th in the world, is number 1 when it comes to cashew apples, or the fruit that grows around the nut. I'll cover this in more depth in another video, but you can only harvest the cashew apple or the nut, but not both. As of 2003, the cashew surpassed the almond as the number 1 nut crop in the world. Thought to have originated from the central Himalayan foothills, the lemon is guessed to have come from a cross of two members of the citrus family. The best guess we have is it was a cross of a bitter orange, Citrus aurantum, and citron, or the Citrus medica, created the base for the lemon. With archaeological evidence of seeds dating back 6,000 years, we know humans have been consuming the lemon, or ancient lemon, for some time. Whether the lemon came from the citron or a variation of the citron like the Buddha's hand, I'm not sure we'll ever know. It is said that the armies of Alexander the Great carried citron to the Mediterranean region around 300 BCE. Close to that time, around 136 BCE, a Jewish coin had an image of a citron on one side of it. Chinese writings from 300 CE speak of bushels of Chinese citrons given as gifts to the Roman Empire. The fruit was imported to Greece and Iran, where it was cultivated and became a staple food in Rome around 300 CE. From there, the citron was brought to Italy, where it grew and survived in Sardinia and Sicily. By 1003, the citron was grown and presented as a token of gratitude to Norman lords. This area became the hub of production, which supplied Germany, France, and Italy. The Spaniards brought them across the ocean, where they would have possibly survived in greenhouses in Florida, and cultivated production in 1620 in Puerto Rico. Commercial operations of the fruit began in California in 1880, but after a couple of rough winters, all the trees died off. As citron was being spread around the world, other varieties were being created, with one being the lemon. Around the same time the citron was being brought over to the Americas, so was the lemon aboard once again Christopher Columbus's ship in 1493. A couple hundred years later, in 1747, James Lind started experimenting with adding lemon juice to sailors' diets who were suffering from scurvy. Vitamin C was still undiscovered, but he stumbled onto a simple solution to a common problem. Today, wild citron trees are still found in northern India. This originating fruit is still used in places like Morocco to create jams or preserves. Which story of domestication and cultivation was most surprising to you? Share your thoughts in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to support the channel, I've set up a Patreon, which is linked down below. And until the next one, have a good one.